No. What? I'm not talking big enough?
No.
Stand on a chair. Anyway, we're here to answer any questions you have. Hopefully, we'll start the process, and a lot of what is being said will be helpful to you to understand the process of the nomination of a bishop, any diocese, but particularly this one, to let you know, I think all of you have read who the nominees are, and we're really excited as a vestry that our nomination materialized in Jed being a nominee.
Yay!
And so he has a PowerPoint on, which is very interesting, and how this process goes, and then there will be some specific information given out to you about the walkabouts, and then any questions that you have, we'll try to answer them. And we have some good people here that can answer it. John Collins and Arlene were on the search committee. They have a lot more information than what I do.
Okay.
You're on.
I'm on. Thank you. Thank you all. So I wanted to do a couple of things. This is actually a good learning opportunity, what we call a teaching moment. So I thought, in addition to just talking about what's going on here, right now, it would be helpful to sort of take a step back and think a little bit about how we do things in the Episcopal Church, because the way we do things here is a little different than some places. And it may be helpful, apart from whatever comes of this particular process and what it may or may not do to life here at Trinity on a day-to-day basis, it'd be helpful to sort of step back and think about, what does this say about who we are as a church? I think there's some real positive things that it would be helpful for us to be clearer about. So, first of all, I want to talk a little bit about the election of a bishop, and then get into what it means to talk about the election of a bishop in the Diocese of Eastern Oregon. Those are overlapping, but not entirely the same topic, if you'll understand what I mean by that. First of all, for electing a bishop anywhere in the Episcopal Church, we deem first we start with a discernment process. And that's a big word, discernment. It means a lot. It means that we don't simply, it means we try and discern. What does God want for us, for where we are? So there's always a discernment process everywhere in the Episcopal Church. And it ends with an election, which isn't merely a political process, but is itself part of that discernment. So we're in the middle of all that. We're going to come back in a minute, but I would just ask you to hold those two in tension. We're going to talk about the discernment process as it played out here. And I'll back up just a little bit to say that everywhere in the Episcopal Church, when we do an election, there's a rule book actually. Anna Carmichael, who's president of the standing committee, talked about it, was best practices. And it was a big binder, and I'm sure, John, you got one like it too. A big binder of information from the Episcopal Church offices, specifically somebody by the name of Clay Matthews. Not the guy who plays for Green Bay. A different Clay Matthews. I know, it's so cool. I had a Skype conversation with Clay Matthews. It was such a surprise. But he puts out best practices, which involves clarifying the roles of the various diocesan committees. It involves talking about the formation of a nominating or a search committee, or a search and nominating committee. It goes by different names. And the processes they have to go through to present ultimately a slate of nominees. And then there are things that follow. And then you get to the election, of course, and there are things that follow that. It isn't merely something we do. We will, in this diocese, elect a bishop, but that election has to get proper consent of the wider church, because it is our bishop, but it is also a bishop for the church. And so it will go out every time after the election for consents from bishops and standing committees across the Episcopal Church. So before it becomes official, it has to be ratified. That usually is a formality, but it sometimes gets a bit tricky. The Diocese of of northern Michigan, I think it is, which is essentially the upper peninsula of Michigan, which in many ways is a little bit like the Diocese of Eastern Oregon, kind of far-flung and not very well populated, or heavily populated. They did a few years ago a process in which they, at the end of the process, put forth one name. And that's who they wanted to be the bishop. They elected that person on the first ballot. And he did not get consent from the wider church. Partly because the church beyond that diocese looked at the process and said it wasn't an election. It was a rigged process. You knew ahead of time who you wanted to be your bishop. You made that person the nominee. That person got elected, and we're not going to give consent to that. So they had to go back and do it over again. That's rare.
Did he win anyway?
No. I think they ended up in the second process and came up with a different answer. I think. I don't recall that for certain, to be honest, but I'm pretty sure.
That's correct, yes.
Okay. So consent is a formality mostly, but it's an important one. And so as we've gone through the process here, we've actually had to remind ourselves of what the process is and what needs to happen, because the rest of the church ultimately has a say in whatever happens here. And then there's the consecration that follows. And it involves having a lot of ceremonial stuff that has to happen, including having other bishops come out and all the rest. It won't be, in this diocese especially, anything quite like what we saw last Sunday. Really. So that's the process. And then I just wanted to talk a little bit about the process as it pertains to the Diocese of Eastern Oregon. We do the same 4 pieces that I've articulated there, but we do it our way. And so it will look a little different, even though it's the same basic idea of discernment and ultimately an election, and then it goes out for consents, and then a consecration. But it's the Diocese of Eastern Oregon, and this isn't like a lot of other dioceses. This is a map. This is, the Cascades, and everything east of the Cascades in Oregon is the Diocese of Eastern Oregon. And there are, over that large geographical area, 22 parishes currently, 22 congregations. There'll be 21 come early January because the church in Nissa is going to be closed. 19 counties, 22 parishes, far flung, and most of them pretty small. I was just here yesterday. Pretty far flung, and a lot of them very small. And we have some history, which is unique to our diocese. And some of you know the story better than I. Actually, all of you. No, many of you, not all of you, but many of you know the story better than I and more personally. And then there's other stuff. And I'm just going to pause here for a moment to invite you to think about what makes this diocese different. And if you have anything helpfully insightful to offer it. But this is quirky here.
There are stiff-necked people.
Say it louder.
Say it louder back there, whatever somebody said.
I said we're a stiff-necked people.
We're a stiff-necked people. That is a part of the difference. And my understanding is, we mentioned Bishop Greg there for a moment. My understanding is he had a lot of good gifts, but part of what he didn't understand is he couldn't simply impose his will on the diocese.
Right.
Because this is a stiff-necked people, not used to taking orders from other outsiders.
It's that rugged Western individualism.
That's right.
That's what I said.
So that's a piece of our identity here, and it makes a difference. But we do the same kind of process, all the same. So part of the process is, in every place, is you appoint a search or a nominating committee. And this is our nominating committee. I draw attention to John Collins from Sisters, and that's how he's listed in the thing. He's also from Sisters and Band these days. But John,
Trinity.
here you are.
Well, I'm not going to talk about the process, but I'll be happy to answer questions if you have them. But I want to point out the role of one of Trinity's members, Arlene Ullman. She was our communications secretary or chair, however you want to
Big job.
huge job. You have no idea. I mean, every nomination, all went through her. She was busy all the time. So, she and I became very fast friends.
In addition, Terry Ramsdorf from Trinity was also a member of the committee. He's now taking a vacation in Costa Rica. So he deserves it. I sort of imagine that Santa Claus on vacation before the big push. Sort of the image I have is Santa Claus on the beach.
Maybe you should send you a picture for Facebook.
I hope so. I don't expect it, but I hope so. And then other people from across the diocese. And in this case, we also have Katie Anderson. Is kind of interesting and different for this diocese. Katie Anderson, who's a Lutheran pastor, but she's also the head of a combined Lutheran Episcopal congregation, which is a theoretical possibility that isn't done very often elsewhere, but it's done rather commonly, relatively, in this diocese, and so she had a part of this process.
Bishop Nettie, when she was here last, standing right here, said this is a real possibility for not only this diocese, but other dioceses.
Oh, absolutely.
Combination of Lutheran and Episcopal. Each, bishops taking over and
Yeah.
interesting.
Well, it's a fascinating reality is that we're doing things here that aren't being done elsewhere, and a good case can be made for the experiments and the trials and the experiences we're having here can teach the rest of the church.
That's right.
So, a part of their process was they created a profile. I'm not going to spend any time on it, just let you know it's there.
Is it available?
I don't think it
Yes,
is actually. I
it
went
is.
looking. I don't think it's on the website anymore.
It is.
Is it?
Under the PDF, there are two. If you push the button that says profile, you won't get it. But if you do the one that says PDF, you will get it.
Oh my gosh.
Because it has
I know.
Tell
I'll
me
talk
I
to
couldn't
Lisa
find
about
it.
that tomorrow.
So you can wait for that. If you want, send an email to John or me, and we'll send it to you because we have it somewhere.
Yeah, but you can access it under the PDF button.
So they came up with a profile, 24 pages maybe at the end of the day. I'm trying to remember how big it was, but it was a
Something like
document
that.
with
Something.
lots of words, some statistics, and other sorts of pictures of the place, including a statement of the bishop we seek.
That's
And then the nominations were due by July 20th. And this is the actual copy of what was sent into the diocese by Pete Lovering. It was, I think, his final act as senior warden. And actually, he wasn't even technically senior warden anymore. But when the vestry met in June and we talked about this possibility, the vestry said, we want to be the nominees, or the nominator. And so Pete, on behalf of the vestry, sent in that form. And on July, I think he said it on July 18th. And Arlene, in her capacity, said, okay, you've got 2 days to get everything in because it was all due by July 20th. It was kind of like that. Now, it wasn't a big surprise,
Well,
but it was a little bit of a surprise. I thought maybe I'd have 10 days, but no, July 20th. So by July 20th, I sent all that in.
Nice.
So that's the nomination form. That's my resume. This is a computer form from the Episcopal Church offices. I don't even remember. Oh, that's a list of bishops. That's one of a series of questions, and then an autobiographical statement.
And let me say that it's a lot of work just to be a nominee. And that's just the first stage.
That's just the first stage. So that was July 20th. And then they sent up more questions, and so I had more essays to write in response to these questions. And then they checked references and a Skype interview on September 12th. Kind of an awkward moment because they were meeting downstairs in the classroom. I thought about two things. I thought about just sitting upstairs in my office and Skyping with them downstairs. I thought about taking my laptop and sitting it outside the room and Skyping with them. Neither of which seemed like a really good idea, so I stayed home and Skyping with them home like everybody else being involved in this process. I tried to keep it even-handed. Yeah, Wendy, do you have your hand up? Nope? Okay. So that was September 12th, and out of that came invitation with the other semifinalists, as we were described at that point.
How many were there at that point?
Well, as it turns out, there were initially 4, but somebody dropped out, and so there were 3, which made that weekend a little bit different. Because when there were 4, somebody might still be cut. Because the charge of the nominating committee, which I knew, and I'm guessing others would have inferred, the charge was present a slate of 3 to 4 nominees.
But
And if you're down to 3, semifinalists just became finalists unless something really horrible happened at the retreat, which is a possibility. In which case, then they would have to go to the standing committee and say, this was our charge, but. So, we had a retreat. We went to Camp and Conference Center. A little bit awkward for a couple of reasons, not least of which is we had a funeral here that Friday. The good news is Chuck Christopher was here, and Chuck knew Marty very well, and he was the right person to take the service anyhow. But it was a little awkward. And I can't tell you why I'm not here. So I had a couple of people say, where's Jack? Why isn't he here? Oh, I don't know. He's just off doing something. Okay.
I think this house
The
is.
Shoots River Trail.
I was just walking the trail.
But if you knew what was happening at Cove, it didn't take a lot.
Yeah.
I'm guessing there were 1 or 2 people who figured it out. And this was our time. Those of you who have been there will recognize some of the scenes. There's Arlene. Oh, look, there's John. And this is Churchill doing a teaching. One of the things we were asked to do was to do a teaching workshop. So there's Churchill doing a teaching workshop. And then we led some worship, and there's Pat leading worship. And then we did some hanging out. It wasn't quite that casual, but
So you had, what, 20 there, maybe?
there were the members of the nominating committee and the 3 of us. So that makes it 11.
It was pretty wonderful, actually. Now, Jen may have a different take on it.
It was they were asked to give a 1-word description towards the end, sort of over lunch, I think, or something, lead into grace. 1-word description of our time together, and the word I came up with was rich. So there we are, the whole nominating committee behind the altar
I was just, can I,
with the 3 of us. And I took a selfie.
you came back really energized from that.
Yay.
They can get
Thank you,
more
Barb.
every time.
You did, you really liked it.
So meet the nominees. There's the 3 of us, and that's what came out of the process. And up on the bulletin board over there, you'll see them pinned to the bulletin board. There's each of the 3 profiles that was shared from the standing committee. There's printed versions of that at the desk at the front counter, and I have 3 more here, which I will place here, and I'll put it on the table there later so you can read them. You can go on our website, which gives you a link to the diocesan website. From there, you can download those profiles yourself and read them at your leisure.
They're very interesting.
They are. Okay. I haven't actually read them. I'm not sure what point there would be for my reading them. Oh, there they are, the 3 of them. And then there was a 1-week, this is part of the process that happens everywhere. And it's a small point, I don't want to spend much time on it, but it's an important point. There's a petition process. It used to be, a generation ago, it used to be you'd go to an electing convention and there would be the opportunity for floor nominations. And it was done fairly commonly. It was done often as kind of we want to just let our rector know how much we like him. I mean, this is days when we had pretty much all men in the clergy. It's a generation ago, I remind you. We want to support our rector. We want to know how much we value him and appreciate him. We think he'd be a great bishop, so we'll put him forth. That was done fairly commonly. I don't know how commonly. Jeff, you might have a different perspective on that. The other option is simply you look at the slate of nominees and say, yeah, but boy, I don't like them. One criticism I suspect that's still going to come to the Diocese of Eastern Oregon is we have a slate of all 3 men. There aren't any women on that slate. And there is a greater sensitivity to the fact that there aren't enough women getting elected as bishops in our church right now. A lot of women in ordained ministry. Increasingly, there are more women as rectors, deans of large churches, prestigious kinds of things, but not getting elected as bishops is still a little bit of a glass ceiling. And so the fact that we have no nominees is something that others will question. You know, those of us who know the process, and those of us who know people involved in the process, and those of us who know the history of this diocese, I think are a little bit more understanding that this probably wasn't a reflection of any bias so much as it's just the way it played out.
Well, and I will add that the fourth that withdrew was a woman, a highly qualified woman who would have made a wonderful bishop. And we were all very disappointed that she withdrew.
And for what it's worth, as I understand it, she didn't withdraw because she thought that the diocese was sexist and would eat her up because she's a woman.
No.
That wasn't that at all. For personal reasons. Personal reasons. So, there we have it. But the window was open, but it's a narrow window. The reason we don't do it the way we used to do it is we have to do background checks on them now. A generation ago, we were very insensitive to that, and we made some big mistakes. And we left ourselves open for some real problems. If you elect somebody you should never have elected as bishop.
Right.
So we do pretty thorough background checks. Police, check with every diocese you've been in, check with every bishop under whom you've ever served. It's a real thorough process to make sure that we don't elect somebody who has issues that we as a diocese don't want to deal with. So what we've come to is a process that opens the window a little bit and then moves on. And the point here is we don't have a rigged election, you see. So, and that's happened as well in the past, where bishops have sort of self-selected a committee and made sure that they get to pick their successor. Well, the process allows for the committee essentially to get second-guessed. If they presented a slate that was deemed unhelpful for the diocese has a chance to weigh in and say, well, we want to add somebody. And that happens, I don't know how often, but it happens. Yes, John?
And that closed Tuesday, and there are no petition nominees. So
this is the slate. You heard it here.
This is the slate, which I think is a good reflection on the work we have done. So, and I will say this, on behalf of the committee, we felt that we would be happy with any one of the three people as our next bishop. And that was the standard that we held ourselves to. That we did not want to put somebody on the slate just to put them on the slate to have a number. We wanted the three best people we could find, and we felt we've done that.
So meet the nominees. There's going to be a walkabout going all around the diocese, 6 different convocations, 6 different events that are open to the public. Open to the public. Anybody can go. Gatherings are open to all. The transition committee has asked for prayers for the times together and for incident-free travel. That was the phrase they used. After reading the profiles prayerfully, they ask, submit questions. You can do it by email or you can do it by snail mail, but they want those questions in no later than 1 week from today. So you have a week to go out, read the profiles, best to send them in, and then they're going to do whatever they're going to do to make that happen. Our scheduled walkabout, though, you can go to any one of these places, or all 6 of them if you wanted to, I guess. But our scheduled walkabout is in Sun River. Joan, do you want to say anything more about that night?
Sure. The nominees are gathering down there at 5 o'clock, from what I understand, and they've asked for a half hour of prayerful alone time. Dinner, soup, suppers will start at 5:30, and then this is a work in progress, so Sun River's kind of formulating how the rest of the walkabouts will look like. And right now they're thinking of a formal question and answer period right after the soup supper, and then once that's done, which will come out of the questions that you submitted, then the nominees we'll probably go into separate rooms so that you can informally walk around and meet them informally. And that way, everyone isn't asking the same questions all the time. From what I understand, the questions that you send in, you don't need to put your name, but they would like to know what parish the question is coming from. I don't know the reasoning behind that, but that's been what's been published that I read. So we're going to have carpooling from here. Gabe Lawson is starting a sign up here.
I'll put it into, the sign up will be on the 22nd and the 29th.
Okay.
So we'll have, or the 23rd, I don't know.
So
Those Sundays, people will be able to sign up. It is an evening, and I just want to make sure that those people who may be uncomfortable of driving in the dark can go. So we're going to have transportation.
So encourage people who aren't here, encourage them to come, and encourage them that there will be carpooling. And Stone River kind of would like a ballpark figure how many are coming from Trinity. So I said maybe 40, and I hope that's good. I hope 40 of us come.
I want to know where they're going to put us all.
That's they're working on it.
That's their problem. And then the electing convention, which is that final phase of this process of discernment, when the church gathers for worship for start, and then electing. There will be as many ballots as it takes to elect the bishop. What needs to happen, and this is part of the process, and it's, I think, a helpful part for us to know about. What needs to happen is there needs to be a majority of votes amongst the lay people and amongst the clergy in separate balloting on the same ballot. Which is to say, clergy don't get to pick your bishop for you, nor do you get to pick the bishop of the diocese apart from the clergy. It's got to be something that both the lay and ordained leadership of the diocese come to agreement on. So if on the first ballot you get a huge majority for one person and for the lay people and a huge majority for another person by the clergy, it isn't an election. Even if the raw numbers say one person got a majority. It's got to be a majority of clergy and laity on the same ballot for the same
And
person.
it usually takes several ballots for that to happen. Anyway, that was my experience when they went up to the Dow.
They go. They're all over the map. I mean, some of them they don't come to agreement on the day of the electing convention. They have to take a break and come back a week later and reconvene. That happens. It's unusual, but it happens. Sometimes they just throw up their hands and they say, we can't elect. That happens. I don't think either one of those is going to happen. I think what's going to happen is I think we're going to have a few ballots and it's going to come clear. But I don't know. I don't know. I don't know how it's going to come clear, by the way. I don't even want to predict that. Yes, ma'am.
Are you going to say, or can you say, let's say it this way, who is generally the electing body and who from Trinity?
Our delegates for the regular diocesan convention are the same delegates for an electing convention. In addition to our delegates, the people who have votes, of course, are again clergy, and those other lay people who serve on standing committee and diocesan council. Those are the people who have vote at convention, and the people who have vote at convention have vote at this convention. So, who are those people here? Can you just show your hands? And the junior and senior ward. So.
Would it be good to publish those names, because if people go to the walkabout and they have input, that's who they should talk to?
It would be good. I hope we remember to do that.
Okay, then. Okay.
Okay?
Just because of the time of year this is, I'm also going to help facilitate driving together to Pendleton. It's a long way, and on the 12th of December, the weather could be problematic. So I want to make sure that all the delegates can go, and anyone who's eligible to vote has an opportunity to go. So we'll be working out transportation so that we don't take, if we have 8 delegates and clergy that we don't take 8 separate cars.
The time, as I recall, was it was going to start at 10 o'clock on that morning, theoretically allowing people to drive in for the day and not stay overnight. I think for most of us, coming certainly from this far, it means going the night before, staying in a hotel. And I certainly, regardless of what happens on the 12th, will be back here on the 13th. I think it's rather important for me to be here on the 13th, whatever happens. Yes, sir.
If by chance you are elected, how is that going to affect our church?
Yeah.
And that's pretty broad, but
Pretty broad, yeah. And let's take that as the first question when I'm ready to do sort of open-ended questions, which I think I might be ready to do on the next slide. I just want to make sure the election itself is clear.
Yeah.
Okay? So that's the election. Oh, wait, yeah, before I come to that. And then there's the formalities to follow. Medical evaluation happens every time. Psychological evaluation has to happen every time, which is kind of an interesting, inside joke there. Really? You agreed to do this? Are you sane? And then there's the process of consents from other bishops and standing committees. And my guess is there are other formalities about which I'm not at all clear, but there are other formalities. And then a consecration in Eastertide. And actually, I've been told what the date's going to be, and I've been told it can't be told until the electing convention. It makes no sense to me, but that's what I've been told confidentially, so I have to hold that
So
confidential.
they're assuming they'll have all the confirmations in before then.
Yeah. And the confirmations in this case, I think, will be a formality unless our process does something squirrely, which could happen. What if we do an election, and on the election there's a complaint that we didn't do something proper? In which case, we may not get consents. The date was announced as December 12th. Actually, as it was announced, it was also announced that the fallback date, if it has to be postponed because of weather, is December 19th.
Which would probably be worse than the 12th.
But the odds are weather come and go, storms coming through, they'll clear the roads out, they'll still do it. But there are some issues there. I mean, it's possible to imagine. I'm not sure it's quite easy, but it's possible to imagine a scenario that squirrels the election such that we have an election, we call the election, and then we send it out for consents, and people say, So, Paul, did you have your hand up?
We've had conventions, places I've been in, where they didn't do it, they couldn't get a clear answer majority discernment that day, and they had to have a second convention.
So things can happen, which is why people are taking care right now to anticipate what can be anticipated and make sure we do it right. Okay. It's question and answer time. There are a couple of scenarios, and we've talked about this, I think, at every vestry meeting for the last several months, for at least a little while. And we've convened an executive session. Executive sessions at vestry are usually to describe personnel issues. You don't keep it on the minutes. You don't record it because it's intended to be kept quiet. And poor vestry members, they did a remarkably good job of not spilling the beans. I suspect there was more conversation going on than I knew about, but I wasn't hearing any hints of rumblings about this since it was decided in June that the vestry would nominate me. It's been held very close because we didn't want to unnecessarily disrupt what was going on, because this is disruptive news. What's going to happen? What's going to happen? First thing to say is my intention is absolutely to stay here as rector and to serve as bishop. In this diocese, we can't afford a full-time bishop. We've got to do things differently. We're already doing a lot of things differently, as we've described, with Lutheran Episcopal congregation pairings. One Lutheran Presbyterian pairing, as I understand.
Lakeview.
Episcopal, what did I say?
Presbyterian? Okay, I said Lutheran.
I don't know. I don't know. But we've already got some interesting partnerships that way. And this is arguably another wrinkle. And what we're doing here is something that, in the estimation of some of us at least, is the kind of thing that's going to have to be done elsewhere later. We're kind of on the leading edge. The trends in the Episcopal Church are clear. What we all knew growing up isn't what we're experiencing now, nor what we anticipate for the future. And Eastern Oregon feels that with 21 congregations, most of which are really small, most of which can't afford full-time clergy of their own. And we as a diocese are in kind of the same situation. And so we're looking at doing things creatively. The model of having someone serve as bishop and rector isn't something that we grew up with. We grew up with a very clear idea of what the bishop was. Though it isn't unprecedented for us. Though we really have to go mostly back to colonial days to remember it. But William White, some of you will remember, was the first presiding bishop of the church. He served as presiding bishop simultaneously as bishop of the Diocese of Pennsylvania, simultaneously as rector of Christ Church, Philadelphia. He did all three at the same time. I'm told he never left Philadelphia to do that. That's another story. The day of the Skype interview, September 12th, it was an interesting point for me to note, was the feast day of John Henry Hobart, who in the late 18th century, into the early part of the 19th century, served as Bishop of New York, while rector of, ready, Trinity, Wall Street.
Oh, wow.
He was also president. He founded seminaries and colleges and did other sorts of things. He was kind of a remarkable guy. But that is to say that there is a precedent for doing that in our tradition, though it's not anything we've grown up with. It inevitably means there will be strains. And I am absolutely convinced that if I should be elected, we're going to have a sit-down with Standing Committee and Vestry to work out some details. Some of the details are financial. I think, in essence, it's going to be the Trinity is going to pay half my salary, and the diocese is going to pay half my salary, and benefits as they pertain. So financially, I think that probably falls out kind of clearly. But some other issues arise. Who's going to cover things when I'm not here? I think there's two different scenarios we've talked about, either of which could actually be very additive to Trinity. One is to get a part-time vicar to come in and serve on those Sundays when I'm not here, and to be available for other needs as they arise, I think particularly pastoral issues that come up. The other option is to look around, and Bend is unique in that we have retirees here, including retired clergy here. Now we want to think through how that looks, but I can well imagine having some adjunct clergy assignments so that if there's a pastoral need, you call Jeff. Wait, just stand up for a second. I'm not sure how many people know this, and I haven't necessarily outed you, but I'm going to out you today. Stand up, Jeff, please. So Jeff is new to us. He's a retired priest. And look at this guy. He's got some energy. John in the back is around, and we've got to figure out how to structure it so that things don't fall between the cracks. But I think with some real intention, that can be done here in ways that would be additive, because I get tired of hearing me drone on and on and on sometimes. It might be nice to have some different voices around here. And so there's some things that we'd have to work out. But I think if we work it out thoughtfully, carefully, and prayerfully, we could actually do well. The other piece that I think could be really helpful, I mentioned this to the nominating committee during the formal interview. That was part of the process in Cove. We had to sit down and get grilled by a whole group of them all at once. They were delightful. They were charming and lovely. And always so supportive. It was, I can't go on there. But one of the things I thought about is, one of the nice things that happen, one of the lovely aspects, it seems to me, of a bishop coming to visit is the bishop tells you what's going on in the rest of the church. The bishop shares perspectives that are bigger than our own local parochial concerns. The bishop talks about what's going on in other parts of the diocese, and for the diocese as a whole, and beyond. And I think it could be really interesting and helpful for us to have somebody who comes back regularly and says, these are important concerns we're wrestling with here locally, but do you understand what's going on elsewhere? I think there could be something really kind of invigorating about that conversation as well. So that's a piece that I offered that makes me imagine that this would be helpful for Trinity, not merely a loss, which I think is sort of the fear that we immediately go to. Well, we're losing half of our rector. Well, no, you're not. You're going to still have everything a rector does, I think, happening here. And in addition, some other things could be added to that. And I think it'd be really helpful for the parish. I hope. But I have to get elected first, so let's not get there. Yes, ma'am.
So on the other foot, if someone's elected who doesn't live here, where are they, is there still gonna be a big transportation thing back and forth from somewhere, or?
And that's where I haven't read the profiles, and I don't really know what either Pat or Churchill would intend, and I don't know whether or if John or Arlene would feel comfortable talking to that. I think that's probably a question that we would ask them, but I don't know, John, you may have
I
something
didn't
else
see
to add.
it in the.
Well, we did ask the question. And I imagine the question is going to come up during the walkabouts. I can't imagine that it wouldn't. Because I know that's a high priority for the members of the diocese. I think Churchill lives in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I feel fairly strongly that he would relocate to the diocese. Pat may or may not. He lives in Coeur d'Alene, but he could be in the diocese within 4 hours driving to Pendleton. It is a half-time job. It used to be canonically that you had to reside in the diocese if you were a diocesan, but they've changed that, so now you do not. So it's going to be an item to be negotiated with the standing committee. I had a conversation with Anna, and I said, Anna, you know, one position that the standing committee could take is, okay, if you don't live here, we're not going to pay to get you back and forth. So that's on your own dime.
Several years ago, the diocesan council went around and asked questions about what we wanted in a
Right.
bishop, and that's one of the things that came out at that time, was we wanted the bishop to
To live
reside
here.
in our diocese.
And the committee understood that. We have asked that question. But at the end of the day, we felt the important thing to do was to come up with the 3 very best nominees. In other words, if we had just said, are you going to move here, and those are the only candidates we looked at, we might have had a whole different selection. We would certainly not have that problem with Jed, and I don't think we'll have that problem with Churchill, but with Pat, and as I say, that's one thing you could submit as a question, and then have the nominee answer that.
And the diocesan seat would be,
Well, we in the nominating process and in talking with standing committee, we're not going to require, if they live in the diocese, we're not going to require that they live in LeGrand or Cove, although we do have a bishop's house in Cove, so the person could, if they wanted to, live there, but they can live anywhere they want in the diocese. Now, one thing you need to understand about all of these nominees is they've got wives, and they've got wives with careers. So you cannot necessarily divorce that, and if you're too inflexible about that, then we have problems. So we've told them they could live anywhere they want to live within the diocese. So if they wanted to take advantage of the job market in Central Oregon, they could live in Bend if they wanted, or Sisters, or Sun River, or wherever. But that is a consideration. So.
Avail themselves of the cosmopolitan opportunities of Bend.
It's about as cosmopolitan as you're going to get.
McDonald's is higher.
Gail and then John.
Well, I have a comment and then a concern. I think that one of the huge benefits of Jed being so called, I think, would be that we'd finally be able to really make use of St. Helens Hall. We would have the wherewithal, we would have so we could bring in all sorts of wonderful things. But the other side, my concern about that is, in my travels about the diocese or attendance at conventions and things, you sense a somewhat of a resentment about Bend. And I wonder is there something we can do to work on that?
Well, one of the comments I made in response to at least 1 or 2 of the questions along the way from the nominating committee is I've been really clear to say to them, and I hope I'm clear enough to say to the rest of the diocese, is if I were to be elected, it cannot be the Diocese of Bend.
Right.
it has to be the Diocese of Eastern Oregon. And as it relates to the question of the diocesan offices in Cove, I do not intend, should I be elected, to move the diocesan offices to Bend. If that should happen, it needs to be, in my estimation, a diocesan decision and not the bishop's decision. It may be that that makes sense to us down the road, but right now we have a diocesan office in Cove. I understand the logic of that, and I like the staff that's there, and I would not personally want to undermine the quality of the staff we have in the diocesan office. So I personally, that is not part of the campaign speech.
That's
So,
more wear and tear on you back and forth.
you know, but the reality is, in this diocese, the bishop's office is where the bishop is.
Yeah.
And the bishop here has to be on the road. And part of that means going off to Cove occasionally, but mostly interactions with Cove is going to be done by Skype, by phone calls, by emails. That can be done a lot of ways nowadays you couldn't do it a generation ago. It can be done more easily now. It still will require being in Cove sometimes, but it also requires, and more requires, being in Bonanza, and being in Canyon City, and being in the Downs, and being, wherever the Episcopal Church is where the bishop needs to be. And that's where the diocese office is going to be, really, I think. John?
You may have answered this question, but I know that the Diocese of Oregon has changed cathedrals, location. In changing a cathedral, does that automatically bring the administrative part of the diocese along with it?
No.
Now, if by chance that we make, and you were here, we make this the diocese of the cathedral, it would this necessarily eliminate a lot of your travel going from. I always thought that the Dells was the administrative part of the diocese.
It was once upon a time, but it hasn't been now for a few years.
And what is Cove now?
That's what goes on in Cove. That's where the administrator for the diocese, Lisa Boquist, that's where she lives and works. That's where the Ascension Camp and Conference Center is, and the staff of that. I mean, they overlap and they help each other out, and so they support each other. And that's part of what makes sense. But the diocesan offices exist there. I don't foresee the need to move them anywhere anytime soon. We do not have a cathedral as such in this diocese, nor do I think we need one. I mean, I guess at some point somebody could decide that we ought to have one, and that's another question, another day. But it doesn't have one now. I don't see it happening anytime real soon.
Has it ever come up that, let's say, Bend is more central in the diocese of Eastern Oregon?
It comes up. Of course, that cuts both ways. It immediately cuts both ways.
Just one more question, and I think he needs to prepare for the 10:15.
Pretty quickly, yeah.
I just want to make a quick comment that I think that the reason that we need to put down our parishes when we ask our question is that we are perceived sometimes in the diocese as kind of overwhelming presence, and I think that's why they want to know which parishes are putting in questions so that all the questions aren't coming from the largest parish, which we are. And I think that we as a parish need to understand that in our reflection with the rest of the Diocese of Eastern.
Well, questions are very contextual, and knowing where it comes from makes a difference,
I
doesn't
think
it?
that's what Gail was getting at.
Yeah. So that's true. This is in the end a process. We talked about discernment. It is a political process, and I don't mean that in the nasty, negative ways that word usually conjures up. But it is a political process. We are concerned with the body politic. And so that is what our larger concern is. It isn't merely how it benefits any one of us, it's how it benefits the body politic. And so it's in that sense political. And it is a discernment process. And part of the discernment is not merely on the three of us as individuals. It is in part a question of whether the bishop-rector model makes sense for us in the Diocese of Eastern Oregon, whether it makes sense to us here at Trinity and of course, more to the point, whether it makes sense to the diocese as a whole. Because I think there are actually, in addition to advantages that might accrue to Trinity, there might be advantages that accrue back to the rest of the diocese to have somebody who still has, in this case, his feet on the ground and his hands in the mix of what goes on in normal congregations, though in this diocese, Trinity isn't normal. But to have somebody who's actively involved in the day-to-day pastoral, liturgical, other concerns of a congregation, informing back to what we do as a diocese together. I think there's, it cuts both ways. But that's part of the discernment. Does it make sense for us as a diocese to try that?
Well, it just occurred to me that if Pat decides not to move into our diocese, that he may also be considering being a rector, because he's a rector now, and a bishop. So it's not just you that might be in there.
That's right. It might be different, and I don't know. I haven't asked him that question. I will say that the three of us will get along fine, and we'll be supportive one of another. It isn't going to be as awkward as you might imagine to spend a week on the bus together going around. I don't know about the wives, but the three of us got along just fine.
I just want to make one final comment, and then we need to go get prepared for the service. All three at the retreat, and I want us all to keep this in mind, and he sort of started this way, but let's end this way. They said that it wasn't about their own personal desires or goals. It was God's will for our diocese. And we must keep that front and center. Any one of these three men would make wonderful bishops. But what we want is what God wants for our diocese and for these individuals as well. And we can't always know that, so we have to listen to our hearts.
And offer our prayers.
So
a final prayer, and it's been printed in the bulletin and in newsletters from time to time, and on the weekend update and all that. So, but I'll just invite us to close with a prayer, and I've even provided for you the text. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Together, let us pray.
Gracious and loving God, through the years you have blessed the people of Eastern Oregon. Grant us the continued guidance and blessing of your Holy Spirit as we prepare to welcome our new bishop. During this time of transition, may we all devote ourselves afresh to your service and loving care by following Jesus ever more deeply. We give grateful thanks for Bishop Rivera and all our past bishops as we wait with faith and confidence. This we pray in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you all. Service follows very soon at 10:15. By the way, if you were at the early service and noticed and scratched your head, or as you go in for the next service, please note, our regular altar is in the shop. We have a loaner, just for the day. The regular altar will be back next week. I'll talk more about that.
You know the diocese.